I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my vlog, where it is both my mission and simultaneous pleasure to highlight my creative journey with the intent that your journey can be at least a little bit easier by giving you inspiration as well as specific takeaways that could apply to you, right? Now, before I fully dive in, I would love to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It means a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So let's get into it, right? January certainly was a busy month for me. Maybe it was for you. It's that time where, you come after the holidays where hopefully you've gotten to rest a little bit, and then it's kind of back into the grind. Now, here in LA, it's kind of the start of award season, and for me in particular, on top of everything else, I work with the Grammys and have been for a number of years, in fact, since 2019. And I'll talk about that experience a little bit later, but I figure best to begin kind of with my passion project, my side project, which is The Arbiters. And if you're unfamiliar, it's an animated feature that I've been working on at this point for a number of years. And we've made really good strides by the end of 2025. Excuse me. We've completed the storyboards up to the end of Act 1, which is very significant. That's great. And we had a really solid version of the script, hence why we were able to do those storyboards. We had various meetings with talent and studios and distributors. And so now in 2026, the real thing is just kind of making those things align, converting some of those early conversations into fruitful things. And obviously not every one of them will go, but you only need a few to fall into place to be able to continue the project and stuff like that. And, that's something for me, as far as anything, I like to be someone that likes to continue momentum on a project as much as possible, right? And so this is one that, in order to continue it, I've been self-funding, right? We did a crowdfund a long time ago at this point, back in 2024, I believe in April, maybe a little bit earlier, and we raised a good significant amount of money to create a proof of concept and things like that, and create the pitch materials that we needed. But that money has kind of gone since then, and it was well spent because it allowed us a foot in the door and to be able to talk about the project. But a lot of these conversations end up taking a real long time, months, if not, in this case, some of them we're planting the seeds that may come to fruition, a year from now, 2 years from now, who knows, right? It all depends, especially on the distribution side. Right now, we're lining up more of the funding, but eventually, if we have distribution kind of there for the long term, that also helps bring investors. So anyway, it's all complex, and there's never a linear path of do this, then this, then this. It's it's whatever works. But the point is, as these conversations take place, I never want to look at someone in the eyes and say that momentum's not continuing to move forward. And in fact, for me, I'm of the belief that if they know that momentum is moving forward, and more so that they can see a tangible result, right? Even with the proof of concept, even with the script and certain concept designs that we have made so far, there's still various elements that's okay, well, what is this? What is this? And I'll never forget watching The Matrix Revisited, which is a documentary about the making of the first Matrix. And the head of Warner Brothers talks about when they first bought the script, they knew it was cool, but they needed many meetings with the directors to be okay, what does this mean, right? And, luckily, Warner Brothers already bought the script at that point, and they gave him some money to create storyboards and stuff like that. And that's when things really started to come together, and, Warner Brothers got more and more excited, if you will. And so for us, as we have these conversations, we can point to the fact that like, hey, since the last time we talked, we've progressed tremendously. So, you're buying into something that is continuing in its progression, right? This isn't stagnant. And secondly, they can actually see it and get excited about it of like, okay, not only is it progressing, but I understand what the hell this is. I don't have to imagine it. I can see it. And holy hell, this is really, really exciting. I want to be a part of this, right? Now, there's other schools of thought, and nothing wrong with it, where, people create something, they go out and pitch it, and, maybe they have success with it, maybe they don't. But while those conversations are ongoing, they work on another project, and that way they can have multiple irons in the fire, so to speak. So that way, one takes, another, might take a few years and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. It's just not necessarily my approach because, again, I get passionate about what I want to create. And like, I've already made the choice that this is what I'm going to be working on. And I'm going to see it to sort of the bitter end, right? It's just a matter of how long it's going to take versus will I complete it, right? Now, obviously, I would prefer not to have to continue on this much slower progression and to self-fund it, right? In fact, that's why in the past month, I've sort of opened up the journey, if you will, for people to get on board and, incorporating exclusives into my Patreon page. So patreon.com/Phil Svitek. And, there people can either subscribe for a smaller fee, monthly, and get all kinds of exclusives, or they can either, like, Patreon allows you to buy things that they're interested in, right? So, usually some things are a very nominal fee of, like, let's say $3. The more kind of exclusive content is a little bit higher. So they can just buy on a per post basis if they want. Or if people don't want to subscribe, but they want to get all the Arbiters updates, well, in that regard, they can pay a large sum to buy this post and get access to this website that's a hub of all things just Arbiters. They'll be given a password and things like that. So it's a little bit confusing. I've tried, hopefully if you have any questions, feel free to ask me about that. But all in all, that's a way to say, like, we're trying to peel back the curtain a little bit more about the process, less about, like, revealing character designs or things of that nature. But of course, there are exclusives that, hint at the story and showcase what we've created as just a fun perk, right? Now, with that, the reason why it's on my Patreon page is we didn't want to put this pressure on ourselves to create something exclusively for the Arbiters. Again, because that would dictate that we need to out and out, like, create new content each and every single week. And we didn't want to feel like we're letting people down. So it's part of my Patreon because there's other exclusives that I can put out on a weekly basis without that sort of pressure. And we can put out good stuff as it relates to the Arbiters. Some of the exclusives that are included in my Patreon, for example, I'm posting right now from my second feature film, which is a live action one called Finding Love in Bogota. I'm posting rehearsals from that time period, right? With the actors and us working through scenes, and then cutting to, okay, what's it look like in the completed film? And for me, it's been a fun walk down memory lane to look at, what was and what it became. And it's fun to see those early ideas and, start to take shape and what we were thinking, and then how it actually did translate very nicely in such an elevated form. But it's just fun because, like, obviously rehearsal is very much make-believe, and then, for us, it's not even being on a set, it's being in real locations, and so there's a tangibility to it, and the way the actors are able to utilize that and give it energy that they had to just kind of not artificially create because it was always there. But again, you're pretending, versus now in the moment of the actual scene, they didn't have they could really just elevate that core performance into something, tremendous. And so it's wonderful to see that. So that's the type of stuff that's shared on my Patreon. And, one of the things that we did release to the public is at the end of 2024, we put together kind of a behind-the-scenes 20-minute documentary about the making of the proof of concept, right? And I thought that was a fun little encapsulation. And, for a while we kept that, for the people who donated to the crowdfund only. But we figured, hey, it's now 2026. Let's put this out for everyone so they can see what we're creating. And so that's available. We are putting together a version of that for 2025. Now, that will be exclusive to Patreon people only. But I'm excited to be working on that, and probably we'll release that sometime in the late spring, if not summer. But it's been fun to really, look back at 2025, and there's so much there, right? We went to the Odyssey Film and Marketplace, which is like the world's biggest animation convention, if you want to call it that. Going to the World Animation Summit for the second year in a row, and just the overall progress that we've made. It's going to be fun to document, look back, and just preserve and showcase to people. Now, as far as what we're working on currently, so we're continuing the storyboards, which has been a lot of fun, especially because Act 1 is exciting, but not to say that it's a lot of setup. There's certain elements of action and things like that, but it really gets going in Act 2. And, now I'm getting to do stuff that I haven't done ever really, which is, just elaborate action set pieces. And so something that's, let's say, an eighth of a page in terms of the script, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, that can be interpreted into like 40 different shots, of a chase or a gunfight or, whatever else. And so it's been fun to really conceptualize that and then start to translate it into the storyboards. And so it takes a little bit longer because obviously we're just tackling an eighth of a page at certain points, but it covers 40 shots. So that's quite a bit versus, a dialogue scene with two characters that ends up being a back and forth, and you can have some creative shots and stuff like that. But that, ultimately, for example, a 4-page scene of dialogue might have 20 shots overall, and you can just have one panel per shot, whereas some of the action shots, there's 40 of them, but each shot has to convey, specific moments that might be 2 to 3 key moments. So it's like, okay, now you have 3 panels per shot. So that also factors into it. So there's a lot that goes into it. And, it slows you down, right? Like, that's just what it is. But it's okay, because that's the exciting stuff, and we want to make sure it's conveyed as exciting, ultimately. And also, too, we want, it's a fine balance, because when I say 40 shots, there might be an inclination to think like, oh, 40 shots for an eighth of a page. That's a lot of shots. Is that overcutting? And I'm someone who likes to see action, right? I mentioned The Matrix earlier, one of my favorite movies, and the things that people love about that movie, especially with the fighting stuff, is that, they're in wide shots and you can see the action. You're not guessing, and it's not just exciting because it's like cut, 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 close up, close up, close up. But, for us, within that, we're creating, sequences that are intended within the script. If someone's chasing someone, it's like, okay, well, how does do they look out their window? Are they trying to navigate? How do the vehicles move? What's happening, right? And really tell that story visually that on the script is very truncated. And so, there's a very cognizant effort to make sure people understand what is happening just through visuals alone, right? And so that's what we're working on. And then beyond that, we're really diving into the concept design. So, we've had various character designs and some environments that we created for the proof of concept, and we've iterated a little bit on some of them. But now, it's like just keeping all this stuff organized, and it's really ballooning into, okay, all the environments that we have, let's go ahead and create that. Okay, where do we even begin, right? Like, what's the prioritization? Then what are all the various props and yada, 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 right? There's so much to it. And so, you just slowly start to unpack it and create what works. Last time I talked about, I created kind of this movie Bible, right? TV shows oftentimes have show Bibles about like character bios and history of the world and blah, blah. And, even if it's a show like Friends, that's like a sitcom, that stuff can be handy, right? Ours is a science fiction fantasy world, so it can get a little bit more in depth. And now it's translating that and having that be as kind of like a pillar we can always go back to whenever we're creating this stuff of, okay, how should this look? And what's been fun is revisiting the stuff that we have created of like, okay, this was a good initial design, but now that we know the script a little bit better, we can revisit it and have some intentionality behind, okay, the color, the design a little bit more, is this fitting of the personality based on the character who's using it, and what's that saying? So all these different elements that go into it, and that's been really fun to see. And it's been really good, as we sort of ramp up to ultimately full production. Right now, we're still in that phase where we're able to not only experiment with the creative, but also just how our process works, how we communicate with each other. So that way we can really iron out the kinks. And then once we do go into full-on production, there's a shared language, both, again, in terms of the creative as well as how we go about it, how we achieve these things. So I think that's a really good benefit to all of this. Now, through this process, we've also been able to see the script come to life, and the things that were intended, we're able to assess much better of, is it working, is it not? And so for the first time since May of last year, we are now revisiting the script and rewriting it. Now, when I say rewriting, it's not, a page one rewrite by any stretch, but just finessing certain moments and, how's the beginning working? How do we want to introduce the characters? And so it's subtle changes that just elevate it. And, for us, there's two people in particular that I work with on the story, John Comfort and Sarah Stretton. And so we had a meeting recently based off of kind of my proposed revisions that I sent them back in December. They had a chance to read it, and based on that, we're assessing, okay, where did I go too far? Over-explain. What are things that do work? How can we streamline it? And I'm cognizant of the fact that we do, quote unquote, have a shooting script that we're working off of in terms of these storyboards. And the good news is none of it ultimately will go to waste. I think a lot of it can be recycled. Some of it's just changing up dialogue here and there. There might be a switch to a scene, but let's say if we adjust the scene, I think we can use 90% of the storyboards already created for a scene. Some might not get used, and we might have to create new panels for it, but the majority is there, and that's the fun part as well. And I think for us, like right now, we're continuing to storyboard based off of the May 2025 script, and we'll iterate revisions just with the team as needed. And then once we get to a version that we like, what I'm going to do is take that shooting script from back in May, take the new script, and just apply the changes to the May 2025 version so we can track it, right? And for those unfamiliar, basically, once you lock a script, like it's important to track the changes because each scene has a designated scene number, right? You start with scene 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. And you have however many scenes. Also, there's dialogue and things of that nature. And I talked about, like, if we're creating all these storyboards, it'll be important for us to know what are the changes. So that way, whether action or dialogue, we know where we have to make the adjustments accordingly. And so when you make revisions to a production script, what they call a shooting script, you track the changes. And you can have many, many changes for a shooting script, and it's designated based on color, right? And usually you print out those change, like it's according to like printed out color pages, right? So you start with a pink revision, or I forget the exact first color, but you might have a pink, a blue, a green, blah 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 blah. So that way, everyone knows that, like, visually you can look at anyone's script and be like, are they using the right script, and stuff like that, right? But anyway, right now, as we do the rewrite, we're not worried about tracking changes. We just want the ability to just do what we need to do, and then we'll roll them up into the past version, right? So that's that's kind of what's been going on in terms of the arbiters. And as I made mention, the big component of the business side is getting some of these early conversations into fruition. Thankfully, I'm not having to lead the charge on that. We have someone designated for that. And, I get a weekly update, we chat, and so fingers crossed, there's good opportunities, and I know one of them is going to hit. So yeah, that's that's kind of the passion project. Something unrelated to anything, but I just want to talk about the Book of Mormon. This is a play made by the creators of South Park. It's a very successful play, very well-received play. And I've wanted to go see it people have been telling me forever that, like, you love South Park, you have to go see this. And it's not that I never wanted to, it was just either always sold out, not in my area at the time, or, my schedule didn't work out, or the tickets were expensive, or a combination therein. But finally, they're playing at the Pantages for a little while longer, and I knew that they were coming to LA, so I was like, okay, now's finally my chance. I can make my schedule work. the ticket prices aren't terrible, and though it's pretty popular, at least, you know, if, like, when I saw that tickets were out, I was like, okay, I can snag some tickets. I have the ability before they, like, sell out. And the fun part for me, having seen it, is that I knew that it was funny. I knew that it was from the creator of South Park. I knew that it was a musical, and it's kind of all I knew about it. I knew it was about, based on the title, that it's something about Mormonism. And that was, you know, probably going to be a satire. Man, oh man, I'm glad that I knew so little information heading into it, because it was just a blast to discover it. And I absolutely loved it, you know. So if you've seen it, you know, comment or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek, like, what your thoughts were. I'd love to chat about it with you. Or if you haven't seen it, and, you know, if you're like me, like, it might be up your alley, go check it out. I think you'll truly enjoy it. So let me talk about the Grammys, right? I've been involved with the Grammys since 2019. Now, the fun part is, so the Grammys specifically is like the award show, but the entity is called the Recording Academy. And the Recording Academy does stuff throughout the year, both in terms of events and content and things of that nature. And I've been blessed to kind of be able to be a part of it. And, you know, whether it's, here's an example, they go to like Ultra Fest or other festivals, Lollapalooza, and do these artist interviews, and then I get to like edit those interviews and things of that nature. So that's something of an example, you know, throughout the year that they might do. Or they have what's called Grammy U, which is aspiring artists can join, and it's almost like a mentorship type of thing. And, you know, they put on events where a successful artist might speak and share their wisdom, almost kind of like masterclass style and whatnot, right? And those are really fun. And so those often get taped, live streamed, whatever, and then they get chopped up into smaller bite-sized chunks. So I've gotten to work on a few of those. In terms of January specifically, they have a week-long official events leading up to the Grammys themselves. And then, you know, Sunday night you have the Grammy Awards. Now, there's the televised portion, which hands out like the top 10 awards that everyone's vying for. But throughout the day, they hand out literally 100 awards for all kinds of things. And that's not televised, but it is, you know, you can watch it on the Grammy website and stuff like that. So for me this year, I got to be a part of the events before the actual award show. So they had this thing called Grammy House. And it was a place you went, it was in downtown LA. And you got to see artists speak and artist performances and just hang out with like-minded people in anticipation of the Grammys, right? And I got to be a camera person for you know, that event, right? Not all the days, but, you know, one of the days. And it was a fun time, right? Like, to work with other people and, you know, coordinate, have a director in my ear calling, like, hey, zoom in, zoom out, focus on this, go to this. And yeah, you know, the big thing with that is you try to be ready as much as possible, but especially for music performances, you know, in terms of these, like, it's not like a performance that is rehearsed much ahead of time, or you know, they might do a sound check for these artists and they do their own thing, but there's so many things going on that we didn't get to be a part of that. And so, you know, you really have to kind of be on it. And ultimately, you're anticipating human behavior, right? In terms of the musicians, because if they're sort of dancing on stage, it's like, okay, which way are they going to go? Are they going to go right? Are they going to go left? And sometimes you're right, and every now and then he might be off. And the trick of it is, especially if your camera's the one being used, is to not make it look like a mistake. So if an artist, if you're panning a camera and this artist like starts going that way, but then dips to go the other way, you don't want to just jerk the camera back to them. It's like, how can I utilize this to my advantage? Maybe there's a band member behind them and you can rack focus to them and that looks intentional. Or maybe it's like you go to the audience and see them, or whatever else, right? So it's just a fun play that, obviously I have experience in, but I don't get to utilize that skill too often. It's crazy, right? When you think about like directors kind of in a way spend like the least amount of time being on sets, because they'll shoot, especially film directors, right? They'll shoot their movie, then they're editing, oftentimes they're in pre-production. And so, one film can take 2 to 3 years, whereas actors, they're on multiple sets and stuff like that. So, in that sense, for me, like when I really get to utilize cameras when I film, right? And which is not too much. So anyway, it was just a fun thing. And then on Grammy night, I work with the digital team, specifically the YouTube team, to make sure, excuse me, all the clips are uploaded. So what do I mean by clips? Well, the acceptance speeches, people arriving on the red carpet interviews, backstage interviews, anything and everything. And there's quite a bit of it. I mentioned that there's about 100 awards that are handed out throughout the whole day. So, and that's quite a bit, if you just put up those acceptance speeches, that's 100 pieces of content on top of everything else. So we have a whole team kind of working on that, and it's quite a big operation. It really makes you appreciate what goes into these award shows in general, right? And the Grammys in particular is fun, not only because I work on it, but also I know other friends that work on it. For example, my friend James Frank, he was there, and he was part of the production. My friend Jeff Graham, he gets hired by the Grammys to be essentially a talent wrangler, for lack of a better term. One of my other friends, Leslie Ambrose, she's a reporter for the Associated Press, so she's on the red carpet. I know a lot of the hosts that are there. Sometimes I know the publicists that get to go, and they're going with their talent. So, yeah, it always amazes me. Like, I think for anything in life, people sort of nitpick these things. And listen, I'm not saying you can't, but I will also say, like, in many ways, it's a miracle that anything actually goes off correctly when you really know the inner workings of any of this stuff, truly. So that's what amazes me. Now, shifting gears to just kind of straight observations. This book that I read not too long ago called Open Socrates, The Case for, I believe, a Philosophical Life is the subtitle. It's one that I've been thinking a lot about, and it makes this argument that in order to really understand people, you have to see the best in them. And that's very difficult, or it can be very difficult, especially in our very polarized world. And I think you have to detach yourself from the social media aspect of it. Like, I think that's, very difficult if you're arguing with people you don't know on social media or stuff like that, which I don't recommend in general. But I think in real life, it becomes a little bit more manageable. And that's a sort of way to get past some of the things that we've got going on. Now, I encourage you to check out, I did a deep dive of this book with Chuck McCon, and we talk about various things, and we touch upon this. But yeah, that idea of if you can really see the best, because ultimately, even any writer, right, that's writing a story, they'll give you the advice that you should love your villains as much as your, protagonists. Why? Because the villain doesn't think they're the villain. They think they're the hero of their own story. And so if you can see the best in people, you can really understand their true psychology, like what is motivating them. And when you can do that, you can have empathy for them. Now, empathy is different than sympathy. But I'm not saying to condone those things. But like Loretta Ross will say, it allows you the ability to call them in rather than calling them out. And it's like, okay, if I see the best in a person, then I know that they have X, Y, and Z aspirations. And you can utilize that to say, hey, I know you to be a person of this moral character. So explain to me how you can also think this, because that seems to contradict a little bit. And I know that's not ultimately who you think you are or who you want to be. And it opens up a little bit of that conversation. So for whatever that's worth, I just wanted to share that. Obviously, it's a little bit more nuanced. This in and of itself can just be a topic of discussion for 30 minutes, an hour, and stuff like that. And we could really deep dive. But, it's something that I'm still processing in my mind, and I just want to, at the very least, introduce that it's something that I'm thinking about and how to apply and utilize, and my own contradictions within all that, right? Because we are ultimately, hypocritical in nature, and part of the book with Open Socrates that it argues, and the Socratic method, is that as much as it is to be able to question and allow other people to rise, right? You want that of a partner. And so in that way, criticism is almost valuable to you, more valuable than just being able to dish it out, right? But again, it has to come with that certain level of respect and things like that nature. But at the same time, I don't know, I guess part of it is, as an artist, you put stuff out into the world, and, there's let's take movies, right? There's film critics, there's audiences, and everyone's going to have an opinion, and they're justified to have that opinion, ultimately. And something that I grapple with, simply because, I just don't have enough of the data yet to be able to know, like, okay, what is truly working and what isn't. And so that's something that I want to make sure I'm mindful of, that to not dismiss like negative comments, because I think a lot of people can just do a straw man argument against negative criticism of like, oh, they just don't like it, they don't, blah, 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 they're haters. And it's like, but within that whole pile, there might be a little bit of criticism that is truthful, even if not necessarily stated in the best way. And how can one apply that to them, right? And so I think it's a delicate act, but one worth considering for any artist and any person, right? Because I don't think you can just dismiss everything of like, well, if I did, like, let's just take it to the everyday world. If I do an action and someone feels wronged by that, It's like, well, that's on them, and it's like, well, okay, that's part of it, but, was that, could I have rethought of it? Could I have done something different? So it's worth looking into. Okay, I want to do kind of quick hits, quick tips as I want to talk about them. Number one, for anyone that is doing a podcast, most of the time it is possible to record clean audio. And I'm amazed at this trend more and more so that as technology seems to get better, audio quality is going to hell in a handbasket for a lot of this stuff. It's one thing if, you're interviewing someone kind of man on the street style, or you're at a junket, or, at some sort of event where, there's lots of chatter, there's blah, blah. Like, that's just part of the ambiance, right? So you're not going to have perfect audio. But even for that, you can have, a good mic, and at the very least, it's clear and audible of what's being said. But more and more, I just see productions that have this notion that we'll fix it in post. And, this sort of over-reliance on, excuse me, audio plugins, AI, and this and that. It's like, it'll just all fix it. It's like, okay, well, first off, yes, you might be able to fix it. But number one, if you have an hour interview and you have just two people, two tracks, the more you have to process it, now you're just literally processing audio for 1 to 2 hours. I mean, even with a fast computer, it can take that long, right? And that's just one part of the process. You might have to apply multiple processes to that, and you have to do this twice over if you just with two people, right? And so now it's taking longer, and usually if something takes longer and it has to be given that level of care, that becomes a fix, it's going to cost you more, right? And ultimately, it's not going to sound as good. In today's day and age, you should be able to record clean audio. I think people, the whole notion is that people get so hung up on the visual aspect and making it look good that they don't want to have a lav mic showing or this and that. It's honestly, who the hell cares? At this point, people are used to it, right? I myself am wearing a lav mic pinned to my shirt, and if you're watching on video, you're probably like, what is this fuzzy thing? And it's I'd rather have clean audio. You get it. It's a mic that's attached to me, right? So what? But at least you can hear me, and you'd be amazed. I mean, there's this show called Unreal on Netflix that follows the WWE. And it's a documentary, and there's constant chatter, motion, and they're in very loud places, right? It's the WWE, so when they're at a live event, there's, fireworks and music and fans. And yet, the people are laved up in such a way that you can actually hear them. And unless they're really whispering on purpose, just normal chatter, you don't need the subtitles for because you can audibly hear them. So why can I hear that better than a lot of the shit that gets recorded for podcasts? And we get this notion, all of a sudden we bastardized the idea of what a podcast is. Oh, now podcast is visual. And especially now that podcasts are on Netflix, which is just an asinine term. That's just, at that point, a talk show or a show, because by definition, that is not a podcast. So everything just goes visual, but have good audio. It makes no fucking sense. Especially when it's so easy and equipment is so cheap that there's just not really an excuse for it. It just boggles my mind. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are the hosts, and that might be, you know, trying to get good content out there, and then might be like, why does this sound like shit? And then editors are going to be very frustrated of like, because, you know, independent creators, they obviously want to spend less money. So how do you spend less money? Well, you make it as streamlined as possible. If an editor has to just be constantly fixing that shit, eventually they're going to have to charge you a higher price if they're not already. So just do yourself a favor and, you know, fix these things. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It really isn't. Okay. Just kind of like an FYI, I talked about the Odyssey Festival, which is the world's biggest animation gathering, right? So there's a film festival, there's a market component, there's a pitching component, there's a learning component. Last year alone, over 18,000 people went. Well, the good news is, if you're interested, but, you know, the cost of travel and a ticket to go is prohibitive, which I understand. It can be costly to go down to France. Well, for the first year, MIFA, which is their sort of market as well as informational portion of the festival, has an online component. So you can watch in real time, you can watch archive stuff. So if you're curious, that might be a nice way to dip your toe into what Odyssey has to offer. So feel free to, you know, type Odyssey MIFA online and see what comes up, learn about it, and stuff like that. This is not a sponsored ad or anything like that. I just really like the Odyssey Festival. I've gotten a lot of questions. In fact, you know, when I went, people were very curious to know my experience. So to the best I could, I vlogged about the experience. I took as many photos and things like that, and we packaged it together into 2 videos. One that's like an FAQ, and another that just highlights my week-long experience. So you can check those out if you want. But you know, now this is a way to get involved that wasn't available before. Next up, so Sonando is this platform that has, think of it like IMDb Pro, but specifically for producers, investors, distributors, co-productions. You know, this is all film related or TV, but it's just a big database. And, you know, it's been a wonderful database. I've certainly utilized it with my projects. And now they've kind of modernized their website, which is great, because while it had wonderful information, the website did feel a little bit antiquated. Now they've improved it, so kudos to them. And if you're unfamiliar, if you've never used the website, you know, now would be a worthwhile time to check it out and, you know, see the new redesign and see how it can help you. Again, this is filmmaker specific, but yeah, it's just a wonderful tool. Okay, something that I've noticed with, you know, people that I test out on some things, you know, some projects here and there, is that they'll get the objective aspects incorrect. And art is very subjective, yes. You know, if I want a logo created, there's any number of ways this can go, right? But there's certain aspects when you get hired that you just want to hit, right? So if someone says, hey, we need to make a commercial that is exactly 30 seconds, then if it's 27 seconds, if it's 32 seconds, you can't deliver a final product and be like, here it is, you know? Because that objectively failed to meet the requirements. You know, if you send a draft and say, hey, we're a little bit longer with 33 seconds, but as you kind of wanted it, this is how it would be. You know, here's my recommendations to trim down those 3 seconds. But if you have any idea, like, that's fine if you're still working through the process. But in general, people still get, I don't know, just be aware of those requirements. There's times when I'll ask for a graphic and it's like, here's the things that I need included on it. And they're not included as part of it. It's like, go back to the original requirements. Like this, it's not a subjective thing. This is what I asked, and two things aren't there. Or like a specific page count or word count. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, think about if, you had someone that is your YouTube manager and you ask them like, hey, can you draft me a title, a description, and tags? And, they came back with a title because YouTube has, for titles, 100 character limit. But they gave you a title that was 200 characters. It's like, well, you need to fit the parameters. This is not subjective. And so just don't fuck up the objective requirements of whatever you're working on. Like, just big piece of advice, okay? Because, people can hire and fire you based on whether or not they subjectively like your work, and it's just the way it is. It can be frustrating, whatever else. Some people you'll work better with others. But just as a baseline, if you fuck up the objective requirements, from my experience, people won't want to work with you. So. Okay, shifting gears. AI continues to be a topic of lots of conversation, right? But one sort of lens that I've been thinking about it is, when I think about the CEOs of AI companies or just how AI companies in general positions themselves, it's like, what problem are you actually trying to solve? Because half the time it doesn't make any goddamn sense. I'm someone who loves Shark Tank. Maybe you do too. And, if you watch that show, even if for just one episode, I'm sure you can tell that the sharks like to see something that has a real world application. Well, what does that mean? That means there is an issue, large or small, and the person pitching to the sharks, they're solving for that issue. They have a solution. And with AI, it's this nebulous, it's pretty fucking wild to me, because with all the, it's like, well, we're creating something cool. It's like, okay, fine, maybe that is cool, right? We can debate that, but I'm just going to put that on, off to the side for a little bit. But what is it actually fucking solving? If you tell me, hey, this AI can solve cancer, this is what we're going for, and this is how we're doing, okay, cool. Makes fucking sense. But it's like, oh, this just, you can use it for cool shit. What is it solving? What does it do better? That's another thing in Shark Tank they'll talk about, like, okay, you might not be like reinventing something, but you're creating a better mousetrap. Is this a fucking better mousetrap? I just want, like, listen, I'm not saying AI is or isn't or couldn't be revelatory in that way, but what is it actually fucking solving? And you know what? That's kind of a big distinction of what I see. And again, I'm not an expert, but at least the framing that I see is that American AI is just this race to AGI, artificial general intelligence. And like, that's the thing that we got to go to at all costs and whatever else. And that's kind of why we're getting all this crap. Whereas China and, other countries perhaps, they're trying to solve something very specific. I think those are the companies that will ultimately win out. Number one, because they're going to be able to sustain themselves, because then if there's a problem that they're solving for people, then people want to use that product. That's, consumerism 101. So that's my suggestion to AI companies and AI CEOs is find a fucking issue to solve and go after that rather than like this nebulous shit that no one can define. Okay, shifting gears. This is less tip-based, but just final random thoughts to end the episode on. More and more, whenever I don't find a movie that I like and might want to see on streaming, which happens more and more, right? We're sold this notion that, any movie, anytime, anywhere, I then, go ahead, put it on my list of ones to buy, and I go buy it. Which can be a little bit dangerous because then I end up buying quite a lot of movies, but at least now I own them forever, and that's exciting. But I want to highlight, I don't know, I'm excited, there's the news that they're making a fourth Mummy. I'm a big fan of the Mummy trilogy starring Brendan Fraser. So not including the Tom Cruise one, but just, the Rachel Weisz and Brendan Fraser one, I think are fun. Some of the CGI doesn't quite hold up as much, but I think story-wise, they do, right? And even including the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I don't know, I'm just someone that certainly loves the adventure story, right? Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider style, so it's kind of in that vein. And I just have such a nostalgia for it that I definitely had to, for me, buy it on physical media, so I owned it, and it has outtakes and behind the scenes featurettes, so for me, I love watching that stuff. But I'm so glad I own it, and I just wanted to kind of take a moment to give it its flowers, but also, for you, where in the pantheon, if you will, is The Mummy? Is that a movie that you grew up watching and loved? Did you discover it later on? Just kind of curious in general, because I just have such an affinity for it, and I know the people in my life do, but I just want to kind of put it out there and see what you thought of it. And if you've never seen it and you do like, again, Indiana Jones and just adventure stories, then I highly recommend. For me, I love The Mummy Returns. That's my favorite of the three movies, but a lot of people seem to like The Mummy. The Mummy, great movie. It's a little bit, not that it's like an outright horror, but it's a little bit scarier. The Mummy Returns, for me, is a little bit more campy and fun. And Tomb of the Dragon Emperor is one that I saw in theaters and I've revisited. And I have nothing against. It's just not one that I've seen as much as the first two, right? So, yeah, I'd just be curious your thoughts on the Mummy trilogy. And also if you're excited to see the upcoming Mummy 4 movie, which won't be out for a while, but all the same. Something else that I've been thinking about, and I'm curious for your feedback on this, is when I look at kind of across the media landscape, it's funny, especially on Facebook, you get all this, take this personality test, find out which Simpsons character you're like, or Harry Potter character, or, which Pokemon would you be, or blah, blah, blah. You name it, it's probably a personality test. Well, obviously, we'd have to figure out how to do this, right? Because I think people would very easily poke holes into how this was structured and, how you can manipulate results. But in many ways, I do wonder if, as far as voting goes, what if we did it kind of more like a personality test? Meaning, it would ask you hey, how do you want your taxes to be spent on X, Y, and Z? Are you pro-abortion, anti-abortion? Are you, how much should free speech be restricted? Should, anything posted on social media, whatever it is, right? Gun laws, blah, 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 blah. And really just go for it, right? I'm naming kind of hot fire topics, but deliberately, right? There should be a way to, how do you think immigration should be handled and blah, blah. And it has all these things. And you just kind of click through it, blah, blah, blah. And then once you go through it, it's hey, great. Based on your results, you now just voted for X person for president, Y person for the mayor of your city, Z person as the governor, blah, 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 right? Because that way, the reason I say all this, and yes, it's in jest, but ultimately, I want to get to a place where we are voting more on our values than just a tribalism, because especially now, we have just a left and right, and it's like, pick your poison sort of a thing. Rather than like, who is truly the best candidate, the candidate you most align with, majority of the time, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, like, even on a presidential debate, there's multiple people running for president, but we only know about the two candidates, and even then, it's like, do we really truly know their policies? And in that regard, like, beyond that, so whatever the results are, okay, here's what this person stands for. There should be a way to hold them accountable if they go against kind of what they said, aka lying. And listen, it's obviously, in the spirit of what American politics is supposed to be, there's checks and balances, and a president can't just wildly enact something, or Congress or whatever. But, I'll just use the president because it's a singular person in that way. If they have a set of policies, like, then we should see them trying to enact that and speak with Congress to try to push that forward or whatever else, right? And if they don't succeed, like, Obama had things that he was trying to go for, but he was blocked by Congress, right? So then it's like, okay, it's frustrating, but that is what it is, right? So, I don't know, this would be more interesting to me because I think, going back to what I talked about earlier as far as Loretta Ross and, the notion of calling people in rather than calling people out, I think we have a lot more in common, and this would partly showcase that. And, when people talk about, like, gun control and other stuff, like, we tend to agree more than we disagree on those things, and yet nothing seems to move. And this would just kind of, ideally hope, kind of expose that a little bit and actually bring results to fruition. So, the last thing that I want to talk about, and it's just a stray observation, but when I think about society, right, there's things that I look for that are indicators of, are things going well or are things going bad? And I don't know where you live, but, here in LA, one of the things that you start to notice is in various kind of stores, whether CVS, Target, and whatever else. Not that I shop at a lot of these places, but, I do look every now and then, and I'm just kind of curious. And it's other places, it doesn't matter, Walgreens, I don't know, just pick your poison sort of a thing. It's interesting what they put behind locks. Let's use Target specifically. Target has electronics, like it has PlayStations and Xboxes and other stuff. And I say that, I mean, there's other stuff too, but things that are expensive, right? A PlayStation is not cheap. And yet, we don't really put that behind a lock and key. We more so put the underwear, the shaving needs, socks, and things of that nature behind a lock and key. Why? Well, it's because that's the stuff that people are stealing. What an interesting indicator that this is the stuff that people are stealing. This is stuff that's for survival, right? Like just having a clean pair of underwear, socks, shaving needs and stuff like that. And I'm not advocating that, stealing's good or anything like that. But I just think when this is the solution to our societal problem, like it goes much deeper, and we should be trying to resolve, why the hell are people stealing items that are just basic items to live, right? And so it's just wild that like this is what we think the solution is. Now, I'm not saying I have the out and out solution, but I just, it's just a bad indicator, man. It just is. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. And I don't know, me as a storyteller, an artist, whatever you want to call me, I just try to observe life. And if anything, that, I don't know, if there's a lesson to impart on it for any of you, it's to go about the world with a sense of curiosity and wonder and just observe these aspects and what does that yield, you know, and why is it the way that it is, and how did we get here, what does it say about us, and, you know, how can we get past that, right? Because that's what great storytelling is an observation of life, a truthful observation of that, and, you know, putting up a mirror, whatever else, ultimately. So that's what I have for you. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. I know it was quite a weave of ultimately random stuff, but, you know, I hope in segments you enjoyed, you know, at least parts of it. I hope you got something out of it. I'd welcome you to comment or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek to let me know, you know, any reactions to anything that I talked about, anything that you want me to talk about in the future, do a specific lesson on that you might be struggling with yourself. You know, I welcome that sort of feedback, and it helps because I ultimately want this to be as beneficial to you. So by having that sort of input allows me to cater more to you. So, and also, you know, I talked ad nauseum about my Patreon as it relates to my movies and exclusives there, but I do put various, you know, I'm able to dive a little bit deeper and share exclusives, like, you know, if you have a movie and you've never done a quality control, well, what does that look like? What does a sheet look like, right? So I have tutorials and templates there and can dive a little bit deeper. So that's available to you, or just, you know, obviously there's over 1,500 free videos of mental fortitude lessons, as well as tips and tricks on just the podcast slash YouTube. So that's available there to you. So thank you, as always, for taking the time to tune in. I truly appreciate you. I hope to see you next time. If you found something useful, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing with friends. And you can explore my films, books, and writing at philsvitek.com. And if you want deeper access, direct interaction, and ways to support my creative work, I have a Patreon page. Everything's linked in the description. However you engage, thanks for being a part of it.